In January of last year, while I was talking with my roommate, I made an offhand reference to an odd movie musical that I grew up with. Most people probably haven't heard of it, and Will hadn't either. He was pretty taken with my short description of the plot, and after I said it was from a biblical story, we decided that we had to watch it. We quickly realized that not only did we really like the musical, there was also a lot that we wanted to discuss. We found ourselves talking about this musical constantly, annoying our friends and our roommates with it, and we've spent the better part of this year joking about how knowledgeable we've become about it and how we could do a podcast or a video essay about it, which leads me to right now and why we need to talk about Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Before I talk about why we have to talk about Joseph, first we have to talk a little bit about the plot. Who is Joseph? What is his Technicolor Dreamcoat? And is it really that amazing? To answer those questions, let's dive headfirst down the Joseph rabbit hole, or the Joseph well for all my dreamers out there. Back in biblical times, a boy named Joseph lives in Canaan with his father Jacob and his 11 brothers. Joseph is Jacob's favorite son because Joseph's mother was Jacob's favorite wife, so Jacob ends up gifting Joseph the titular Technicolor Dreamcoat. Joseph's brothers despise him because of Jacob's obvious displays of favoritism, but also because of something interesting about Joseph: his prophetic dreams. Joseph's most recent dream tells him that he's destined to rise above his brothers. The brothers, who are jealous of Joseph and angry about these dreams, obviously decide that they need to kill Joseph. At first, the brothers try to throw him down a well, but when a group of Ishmaelites pass by, the brothers decide that they can make a quick buck and sell Joseph into slavery. So they rip up Joseph's coat, cover it in goat's blood, and craft an elaborate story about Joseph saving them from a goat, I guess. The story that the brothers are telling Jacob about Joseph's death is told to us through a Western-inspired square dance number, which is definitely a choice. It's worth mentioning right here that one of the things that makes this musical stand out from others is its constantly changing musical genres. One More Angel in Heaven is probably the first obvious shift of musical genre, and it's honestly really hilarious when you start paying attention to some of those little details. Now, while that musical number is happening and the brothers are celebrating finally being rid of Joseph, our protagonist is being taken to Egypt as a slave, and we get this really great clip.
Poor Joseph's sold to be a slave, situation's grave, hey, sold to be a slave.
He starts working for the wealthy Potiphar, and while he's there, he's hardworking and diligent and eventually climbs the ranks and garners the attention of Potiphar's wife. I have to admit that this is one of the strangest aspects of this musical, the entire Potiphar number making up this bizarre Art Deco Charleston aesthetic. The climax of the scene can best be described as an orgy, and Joseph sort of gets caught up in these exploits at the hands of Potiphar's wife, and he very much does not consent to it.
Stop! I don't believe in free love!
Also, I hope you liked Joseph's shirt, because that was the last time we'll ever see it. Potiphar is enraged by Joseph getting tangled up with his wife, and he throws Joseph in jail, which gives us probably the best thing I have ever seen put on screen. In jail, Joseph sings the hauntingly beautiful ballad, Close Every Door. It's chock full of Donny Osmond goodness and some interesting symbolism. Tim Rice pretty clearly wanted to touch on the plights of Jewish people in this song, and I don't know how much clearer you can get with the lyrics, "Give me a number instead of my name," and "Children of Israel are never alone." This song really stands out among the rest because of its tone. It's the sole serious piece in a bunch of oddities. I think this is one of the few spots in the musical where if you showed it to someone with no context, they might say, yeah, that's based on the Bible. The melancholia of Close Every Door fades into other prisoners cheering on Joseph. It's a pretty startling change, in my opinion, but at this point we're really just along for the ride. Act 1 concludes with two other prisoners being thrown into Joseph's cell, the butler and the baker. They're both former servants of the pharaoh, and they are impeccably dressed. They've been having strange dreams, and wouldn't you know it, Joseph is pretty good at interpreting those. Joseph predicts that the butler will go back to working for the pharaoh, but that the baker will be executed. This gives us probably one of the best transitions in musical theater history.
Don't rely on all I said I saw. It's just that I have not been wrong before.
number of Act 1 is Go 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 Joseph, which is a disco-inspired number where the chorus cheers Joseph on to follow his dreams. Never mind the fact that the baker is about to be executed. We can move on from that. Also, an old man who may or may not be God is here as well. At the beginning of Act 2, we're introduced to the Pharaoh, who's starting to have some strange dreams. I wonder who can help with those. The newly released and rehired butler tells the Pharaoh that he knows a guy who can help with those dreams, and Joseph is promptly called before the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh's song introduces us to this musical's next bizarre concept, the Elvis bit. For whatever reason, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice decided to model the Pharaoh after the king, Elvis. I'm still amazed by this choice. I don't know whether I like it or not. His smug aura mocks me, but I find myself jamming along with his scantily clad dancers as he recounts his dream. Speaking of which, he's been dreaming of cows and corn, specifically 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, 7 dead ears of corn, and 7 healthy ears of corn. Joseph's analysis of the Pharaoh's dream predicts that there will be 7 years of plentiful crops, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advises the Pharaoh to hire someone to ration the plentiful crops in order to survive the incoming famine. Whose theme song is that? Playing in the background? Could it be? Of course, the Pharaoh hires Joseph as his right-hand man, which makes Joseph the second most powerful man in Egypt. That's a pretty long way away from slavery and imprisonment.
Anyone from anywhere can make it if they get a lucky break.
7 years later, back in Canaan, wouldn't you know it, Joseph's family is facing the effects of the famine. In Those Canaan Days, which is styled after dramatic French ballads, the brothers lament their hungry lives and how much better things used to be. They even miss Joseph and his ambitious dreams. They decide to go to Egypt since they still have food, which brings them right to Joseph's doorstep. However, they don't recognize their long-lost brother, who has undergone plenty of change in the several years it's been since he's seen them, and they grovel at his feet for food. Joseph, who of course recognizes them, decides to test his brothers by putting a golden cup in his youngest brother's Benjamin's basket and accuses them of theft. The brothers beg Joseph not to persecute Benjamin in a reggae calypso number called the Benjamin Calypso. I think the movie gets away with this number because they've casted a black man as Judah, who's the primary brother singing this song, but I can't help but think about all the other productions of this show where a white man would have been playing this brother, and it definitely would have been racially insensitive. It is a catchy song though, and I would be lying if I said that my roommate and I did not sing this song to each other constantly. I really couldn't explain to you why they chose this particular genre for this particular song, and it's especially puzzling when you remember that the guy behind the music is Andrew Lloyd Webber of Phantom of the Opera and Cats fame. Now that I think about it, it's probably not all that strange that the guy who wrote Cats is writing this musical. This song proves to Joseph that his brothers have changed for the better, and he eventually reveals himself to them as their long-lost brother, and Joseph reunites with Jacob as well as his Technicolor Dreamcoat, and the musical ends. While that is ostensibly the end of Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, there is something about this musical that I haven't really touched on yet. The David Mallet movie production actually takes place within a framed narrative, where the narrator, played by Maria Friedman, presents the story to a mass of students in an auditorium. She weaves in and out of the story, and to be honest with you, she both metaphorically and physically carries this musical. I particularly love her performance in Potiphar. While she's belting her face off, she's also acting as a medium, guiding us through the story through large gaps of space and time. Us, the audience at home, and us, the children within the narrative, watching the play unfold. And the children are also an integral part of the play. They act as additional chorus members a lot of the time, most notably in Go 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 Joseph. I think the inclusion of the children is a really interesting aspect of this film, especially when you consider the kind of audience that David Mallet had in mind, that being young Catholic school kids like myself. There's something really captivating about the opening of this musical, with Donny Osmond kind of meandering through hordes of uniformed school children in Jesus Christ cosplay as he sings Any Dream Will Do, which is a pretty boring song in comparison to what follows. I think the inclusion of the children's chorus is another interesting thing, considering it brings the musical back to its humble roots. David Chandler details a lot of the early history of the musical in his article, Everyone Should Have the Opportunity, Alan Doggett and the Modern British Musical. The musical was commissioned by Alan Doggett in 1967 when he was head of music at Collect Court Boys Prep School in London. Doggett only wanted a 15-minute production that could be performed by the boys at the school in an end-of-the-year concert. Doggett had taught Andrew Lloyd Webber's father, which was how he was acquainted with the young composer, who I believe was only 19 at the time. From what I can tell, the musical very quickly became something different from its original conception, and by 1968 they had produced a half-hour-long recording that would pave the way for it in official stage production. The musical continued to grow and evolve over the years, gaining a lot of investments and a name for itself in school repertoires by the time it finally reached Broadway in 1982. The musical was born to be performed for and by children, which I think David Mallet knew going into the film production. It still captures the live production aspect with the children watching, but it still has the stylistic film flair that David Mallet was probably looking for. There's another, even lesser known musical that pulls from the Joseph biblical story, and that is an opera titled Joseph by Etienne Nicolas Méhul, and it was produced in 1807. However, in 1989, years before Mallet's 1999 production of JATD, French director Pierre Jordan adapted the opera for the screen. This version also depicts a group of school children watching the stage production, and I imagine that this influenced Mallet. To be honest, I haven't watched this production, but I would kill to be able to. I've only been able to find some of the music online, so I guess I just get to live with the knowledge that that's out there somewhere. David Chandler, who is another JATD historian like myself, and whose articles have contributed a lot to the production of this video essay, details a lot about the opera in his article, Bible Light for Schools, How Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat Redefines Classical Old Testament for Young Theater Audiences. Now, the opera is obviously a more serious recounting of the biblical story, but there are some creative choices that stand out to me. The opera seems to place a lot of specific emphasis on the relationship between Joseph and his second oldest brother, Simeon. Simeon is often thought to be the brother that instigated Joseph's fall from grace. Opera Simeon is his own complex character with internal thoughts and motivations, whereas JATD Simeon is just another cog in the machine that is the singular character of the brothers. However, I think you can find depth in this portrayal of the brothers, especially when you consider that in Those Canaan Days, the second act French ballad sung by the brothers, the primary brother soloist is Simeon. When he sings about misjudging Joseph and missing his entertaining dreams, those in the know about biblical canon might look at that number and say, yep, that's Simeon and his classic Cain complex. It's interesting to note that at its core, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat really does not change the original story told in chapters 37 through 50 of Genesis. Much of the complexity is lost in translation, but I think the core themes are there. Forgiveness and reconciliation are right there at the forefront of the musical's themes, but tend to be overshadowed by whatever antics are happening on screen. One moment, Joseph is grappling with being incarcerated and telling one of his cellmates that he's going to be executed, and the next thing you know, children are pouring in from the shadows and boosting Joseph's confidence. It hardly ever touches on God's love or Catholic guilt or what have you, and acts more like a boat sailing through a sea of biblical references. Let's compare this with another Lloyd Webber-Rice collaboration, Jesus Christ Superstar, released in 1970. They once again tackled adapting a biblical story for the stage, this time in the form of the final days and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. I honestly have to laugh every time I remember that they went from semi-lighthearted story about a guy in his coat to the literal passion. I would definitely say that with Jesus Christ Superstar, Lloyd Webber and Rice learned from the mistakes with Joseph, and they were able to lean into the more mature and emotional themes from that story. Especially with songs like Gethsemane, I Only Want to Stay, and I Don't Know How to Love Him. They hit way harder for me than Close Every Door does. Unfortunately, I think this makes some of the sillier parts of JCS stand out even more than Close Every Door does, but I can't help but see that this version of King Herod is just a rehashed Elvis Pharaoh bit. The film version of Jesus Christ Superstar, which was directed by Norman Jewison in 1973, also takes the form of a framed narrative. This time, a hippie theater troupe is headed into the desert to put on a fun production of The Passion of Christ, I guess. It makes way less sense to me than Joseph's framed narrative, but they're for different target audiences. While JATD is more for children in church basements, Jesus Christ Superstar is more for adults who might catch the film on TV. Other musicals that focus on religion, such as Godspell or the Book of Mormon, also take similar stances, where they step away from the stories and place them within the musical as a sort of means of moving a plot. The Book of Mormon is about two missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Africa, just as much as it is a story about the Book of Mormon and its teachings of service and community. What makes Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat so interesting in this aspect is the way the musical is presented to children as a kind of attainable goal. Whether you're a kid in an auditorium or a college student with your friends, you too can achieve all of your hopes and dreams, and maybe you can catch a glimpse of Donny Osmond's charm and winning smile while you're at it. Donny Osmond is an interesting character himself amidst all of this. He rose to fame as a child star in his band with his brothers, the Osmonds, and he was apparently a teen idol in the 70s. He played Joseph for over 2,000 performances in Toronto and then eventually relocated to a production in Chicago between 1992 and 1994. He of course starred in the movie in 1999, and to be honest, he should have received an Academy Award nomination for this role. He also did the singing voice for Shang in Mulan, like I'll Make a Man Out of You, but that's less impressive to me. Now Donnie does shows in Las Vegas and Chef Boyardee commercials with Lil Yachty.
My name is Donnie O, and you know I love my raviolis. I'm gonna let you know, sauce it up, here we go.
He was even on the hit show, The Masked Singer. Going to his website is always a fun trip, the Through the Years section going quite literally day by day of his entire life, and a page called Are We Related, where you can find out if you're related to the Osmonds, if that's something that interests you. My personal favorite part of Donnie's website is the My Beliefs section, which basically acts as an advertisement for the Mormon faith and is full of links to other LDS websites and Q&As with Donnie, where he answers questions like, do Mormons pray for the dead, and is my mom going to hell? You can do with that what you will. I often like to compare Ted Neely as Jesus Christ in Jesus Christ Superstar to Donny Osmond. I actually got to see Ted Neely as Jesus in an Easter production of JCS in about 2007, and while I was pretty young, I do remember being blown away by that old man. So it doesn't surprise me to learn that Ted Neely apparently had quite the fan base back in his heyday. His depiction of Jesus Christ was elevating him past celebrity status and into something else entirely. Fans would wait for hours after JCS performances to take pictures or get autographs or just catch a glimpse of him. At the time, I think this was a concept that was still pretty new to people. The idea that masses of fans would become so attached to a celebrity that they would be willing to waste time and effort on that person. This led to a lot of people looking critically at Neely's fans, as he seemed to not only play Christ, but he seemed to embody Christ to his fans. Joran Egerman and Johan Roland's article, What's the Buzz? Celebrity Worship and the Fandom Experiences of Ted Neely, really goes in depth on this subject and the kind of theological questions that this raises. I mention it now because I think Donny Osmond is kind of the anti-Ted Neely. That's not to say he's the anti-Christ or anything, but I mean, Ted Neely has sort of been riding the Jesus Christ Superstar high for 50 years, whereas Donny Osmond is doing whatever the hell this is in Las Vegas. That's not to mention that he once criticized Lady Gaga and Beyonce for sex and profanity in the Telephone music video, and he's openly opposed to same-sex marriage. He apparently doesn't condemn homosexuals from the church as long as they're celibate. To be honest, that won't stop me from trying to hire this guy to sing at my wedding. Dreamcoat and all. Speaking of Dreamcoats, despite the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat making up 67% of the title, you might have noticed that it's not in the musical very much. It gets a whole song dedicated to it, but Joseph is really only wearing it for that song and maybe a minute or two afterwards before the brothers are ripping it to shreds and covering it in goat's blood. It spends most of the musical being cradled by Jacob, who's mourning the loss of his son, and it doesn't return to Joseph until years later when he reunites with Jacob. On the surface, it doesn't seem like the coat has that much relevance to the plot at all. The story's about Joseph and his fraught familial relationships and the kind of antics he gets up to with them and his tumultuous rise to the top of Egypt's government. You might as well have called it JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The coat only gets a brief mention in the chorus of Go 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 Joseph. You and your dream coat ahead of your time. This stands out to me considering he doesn't have the dream coat at this time. He hasn't had it for a while and he won't have it for even longer. You could look at the biblical text and notice that the coat doesn't really have a prevalence there either. It's only mentioned 3 times. When Jacob gives it to Joseph, when Joseph is talking to his brothers, and when the brothers are ripping it off of him and tearing it and covering it in goat's blood. And the opera doesn't seem to pay any attention to the coat either. I can't find Chandler making any reference to it. So I have to wonder why Rice and Lloyd Webber place so much emphasis on it in the title and in its own song, only for it to not have much physical narrative importance. So the coat must represent something metaphorical, right? The easiest conclusion we can come to regarding the Dreamcoat is that it represents Jacob's favoritism for Joseph over his brothers. Because Joseph's mother was Jacob's favorite wife, this allows Jacob to relive some of that passion he had for her through Joseph. This is what leads to Jacob giving Joseph the lavish Technicolor coat, essentially placing Joseph above his brothers, long before Joseph's dream has even come to fruition. In this way, the coat acts as the instigator for the plot, the MacGuffin that allows the brothers to enact their schemes, and it's what sends Joseph down the path that he dreamed of. So when Joseph doesn't have the coat, barren of both color, clothes, and humility, we can feel the absence of Jacob's favoritism. But does the coat only represent Jacob's love? I think it can also take the form of the brothers' jealousy. They even turn a shade of green when Joseph is first wearing it, becoming Technicolor themselves. Once they've gotten rid of Joseph, they tear the coat up, they cover it in blood and defile Jacob's love, but it's also being flaunted privately. It's giving it this sort of triumphant spoil of war vibe, and it's giving the brothers the satisfaction that they crave. When the coat is returned to Joseph at the end of the play, the brothers have made peace with themselves and with their lasting guilt. Thus, the jealousy has morphed into something like an apology. There's also a case to be made about the Dreamcoat representing God's love. God is pretty noticeably absent in every capacity from JATD, unless you subscribe to the theory that the narrator is God, which I do. But when you think about the Technicolor Dreamcoat as a sort of blessing from God, then the low points of Joseph's life when he's without the coat start to seem a little bit more like a man questioning his faith and his will to live. Close every door might not be as surface level as we think in this case, and I think it gives a much needed depth to Joseph that I don't think is there from a non-God related perspective. Finally, let's talk about the other 23% of the title, Joseph himself. My friends and I have differing opinions on Joseph, which might be odd considering he's our protagonist and our hero of the story. For all intents and purposes, Joseph is a nice, vibrant young man who's a victim of tragedy at the hands of his own family members. Not to mention that he was sexually assaulted by Potiphar's wife, which is a fact that is seriously glossed over within the plot, and I still can't believe that it's shown to children. But if you were Joseph's brothers, wouldn't you be a little pissed to. Maybe you wouldn't resort to attempted murder and selling your brother to slavery, but I can't say that Donny Osmond's face doesn't incite violence in me. He's really cheesing and milking every scene he's in, which can read as either incredibly entertaining or infuriatingly annoying. But as far as Joseph's actual character goes, I've had friends express annoyance with his confidence and apparent superiority complex that he gets by the turn of the second act. His dream coming true has come with the price of his humility, and by the time he's been working for the pharaoh for several years and everyone else is in the midst of a famine, he's really got quite the ego on him. You may be frustrated with Joseph's clever plot to trick his brothers in their time of need, and you might find his revelation of himself to them as disingenuous and cold. So on one hand, you have a Joseph that has become a shadow of his former self, and on the other, you have an apology and a forgiveness that feels unearned. It's hard to look at all of this and decipher whether or not this complexity to Joseph's character is intentional, or if Rice and Lloyd Webber happen to strike gold when it comes to complicated character arcs. Joseph and Jacob reuniting at the end of the musical unfortunately does nothing to further this narrative or add any complexity to Joseph's character at all. Die-hard JATD fans are simply left to parse through these fragments of character development and pick up the interesting details ourselves. I think that's what makes the musical so compelling to me. These things beneath the surface and between the lines. I can't even tell you how many times a simple question has led to a long-winded discussion between me and my friends. Which brother song is the best? Is this biblical story based on historical events? Is Joseph gay-coded? Is the narrator God? Is this God? How did we let Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber get away with this? Perhaps the biggest question is, as a musical whose original purpose was to educate children, what can we learn from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? And what sort of valuable life lessons have the impressionable religious youth received from viewing this film? I don't know if it's as simple as if you can dream it, do it, but I don't think it's quite as complicated as you can find God within yourself even when your faith is shaken either. Whatever it is, it apparently resonated enough with me to do this project. Thus concludes this brief analysis of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I hope at the very least you learned something, and who knows, maybe you've come to appreciate this masterpiece just as much as my friends and I have. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, anyone from anywhere can make it if they get a lucky break.